The Midnight Drive. It was late, well past midnight, when Sarah finally decided to leave the office. The day had been long, exhausting, and the only thing she wanted was to get home and collapse into bed. Her house was about a 45-minute drive from the city, and while the highway stretched through mostly empty fields and woods, she was used to the quiet, peaceful ride. Sarah's car, a reliable old sedan, rumbled to life as she pulled out of the parking garage. The streets of the city were eerily empty, as most of the stores and restaurants had closed hours ago. Streetlights flickered overhead as she turned onto the highway, her tires gliding smoothly over the asphalt. Her favorite playlist hummed in the background, offering a bit of comfort as she settled in for the ride. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. The roads were dark but familiar. She'd driven this way countless times before. The highway was bordered by trees on both sides, their dark, spindly branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. The occasional truck passed by in the opposite lane, headlights momentarily brightening the otherwise pitch-black stretch of road. But something felt different tonight. The first glance, it began when she noticed a flicker in her rearview mirror. A quick flash of movement caught her eye, like a shadow darting across the road behind her. Sarah frowned, glancing into the mirror, but there was nothing there. Just the empty highway stretching out behind her, the faint outline of trees illuminated by her taillights. "Must be tired," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. She turned up the music, hoping to shake off the creeping sense of unease that had begun to settle in the pit of her stomach. A few minutes later, she saw it again. This time, the shadow was larger, more distinct. It was as if something was following her. Her heart quickened as she checked the mirror once more, scanning the dark road behind her. Again, there was nothing. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She knew her mind was playing tricks on her. It had been a long day, and her exhaustion was likely making her see things that weren't there. She focused on the road ahead, determined to ignore the strange feeling crawling up her spine. But the third time she saw it, it wasn't just a shadow. There, in the rearview mirror, she saw the outline of a figure. It was faint, barely visible in the darkness, but it was definitely there, standing on the side of the road just beyond the reach of her taillights. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She looked again, this time turning her head slightly to get a better view, but by the time her eyes focused, the figure was gone. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened as she tried to rationalize what she had seen. "Just a trick of the light," she whispered, though her voice was shaky. "Or a hitchhiker." She kept driving, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror more frequently now, searching for any sign of movement. The dark road seemed to stretch on forever, the trees looming on either side like sentinels watching her progress. The roadside figure. About 30 minutes into her drive, Sarah's heart nearly stopped when her headlights illuminated something on the side of the road. It was a person, a man, standing by the shoulder, his back to the road facing the trees. He was dressed in what looked like an old, tattered coat, his dark hair falling over his shoulders in messy strands. Sarah's breath hitched. Why would anyone be out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? Her first instinct was to slow down and see if the man needed help, but something stopped her. A deep primal sense of fear gripped her. There was something off about him, something wrong. His posture was too rigid, too unnatural. And then there was the way he stood, perfectly still, not reacting at all to the sound of her car or the light from her headlights. As she passed him, Sarah couldn't help but glance over. For a brief moment, her headlights caught his face, or what was left of it. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were hollow, empty, like black pits staring into nothing. His mouth hung open, frozen in an expression of horror, as if he had been screaming for a long time and simply stopped. Sarah screamed, her foot slamming down on the gas pedal as she sped past the figure. Her heart pounded in her chest and her hands shook violently as she gripped the wheel. What was that? Her mind raced as she struggled to comprehend what she had just seen. It couldn't have been real. It couldn't be. The chase begins. As her car sped down the highway, Sarah forced herself to take deep breaths, trying to calm down. She kept telling herself it was her imagination, that the man was just some poor soul who had been wandering the highway for too long. Maybe he had a mental illness. Maybe. Then she saw him again. Her blood ran cold as her headlights swept over the side of the road. The man was standing there, ahead of her now in the exact same position, his back to the road, his face toward the trees, his body unnaturally still. Sarah's stomach lurched. She had just passed him. There was no way he could be here now, standing in front of her. Her foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, pushing the car to its limits. The engine roared as she sped past the figure once more, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't dare look at him this time. She couldn't. But the faster she drove, the stronger the feeling of dread grew. It was as if the road itself was closing in on her, stretching out endlessly in front of her, while the figure was everywhere. She passed him again, and again. Each time he was closer, standing at the edge of the road, always in the same haunting position. The man never moved, never turned toward her, but she could feel him, feel his presence pressing down on her, suffocating her. "No, no, no," she muttered to herself, her voice trembling. "This can't be happening." She checked the rearview mirror again, praying that the figure wouldn't be there. But this time, something else caught her eye. In the back seat, a flash of movement, a shadow shifting behind her. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. She swerved the car wildly, nearly veering off the road as she whipped her head around to look at the back seat. But it was empty. No one was there. She laughed nervously, her mind playing tricks on her. Of course, there was no one in the car with her. She was alone. She had to be. But then she saw the figure again, this time standing in the middle of the road directly in her path. Sarah screamed, slamming on the brakes. The tires screeched, the car skidded, and for a heart-stopping moment she thought she was going to hit him. But just as quickly as he had appeared, the figure was gone, vanished into thin air. Her car came to a screeching halt in the middle of the highway, the smell of burning rubber filling the air. Her heart pounded in her ears, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She looked around, desperately searching the road for any sign of the man, but there was nothing, just the empty highway and the darkness beyond. Sarah sat there for a moment, trembling, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. The final encounter. Slowly, cautiously, she put the car in gear and began driving again, her eyes darting from the road to the mirrors, searching for any sign of the figure. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. The road seemed endless, stretching out in front of her like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Then, without warning, the car radio crackled to life. A low, distorted voice filled the car, whispering something she couldn't quite make out. Sarah's hands tightened on the wheel as she turned the volume down, but the voice didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, filling the car with a strange, guttural sound. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. The radio went silent. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded as she glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. And there he was, sitting in the back seat. His hollow eyes met hers in the mirror, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Sarah's scream echoed down the empty highway as the car swerved off the road and plunged into the darkness.